Concern and speculation after a fall sends a Supreme Court justice to the hospital. More fallout over high-level changes at the Justice Department. And a closer look at the Evangelical vote in the midterm elections. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. Those stories and more coming up. But we begin tonight with the 307th mass shooting in America this year, this one in California.
This morning's shooting happened at a local bar in one of America's safest communities, leaving at least 13 people dead, including the gunman who was a former Marine.
The sheriff responding to the scene of the latest mass shooting said it looked like hell. CBN's Amber Strong has more.
Another week, another community in shock.
We couldn't get out because the shooting was on that side. So then our friends got the bar stools and they started slamming it against the window so we could get out.
Survivors from the Borderline Bar and Grill are recalling the chaos that took place at the popular venue on college night.
I just started hearing these big pops, pop, pop, pop.
He shot the cashier. Just a young girl.
Students from nearby Cal Lutheran and Pepperdine University were at the venue at the time. Pepperdine, a private Christian school, is offering pastoral care and issuing this statement. The university is grateful for the first responders who risked their lives for the safety of our community. First responders like Ventura County Sheriff Sergeant Ron Heelis. The 29-year vet and father made the ultimate sacrifice while saving the lives of those inside.
It's lost a hero. It's lost a great human being.
Residents paused along city streets to pay their respects to the fallen deputy. The gunman, 28-year-old Ian David Long, a Marine Corps vet, walked into the venue and opened fire. Law enforcement don't have a motive but are pointing to PTSD as a possible cause. The shooting comes just 12 days after 11 members of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh were killed in a similar shooting. Ventura County Sheriff Jeff Dean, who says he also comforted members of the Jewish community after that shooting, says it's time for change.
We've got to do something about the hate, and we've got to do something to just spread the love and reach out and help people.
An unidentified man who says he knew several of the victims came to the scene to pray.
Lord, I ask that you just put your hand on the victims and the friends and family, Lord.
And here in Washington, the White House flag is at half-staff as the nation grapples with the aftermath of a scene becoming all too common. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Amber. Well, in other news, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is recovering in the hospital tonight. The 85-year-old fractured 3 ribs on her left side after falling in her office last night. She initially went home but was admitted to George Washington University Hospital this morning after complaining about discomfort. Over the years, Ginsburg has had a number of health concerns, undergoing a heart procedure in 2014 and previously battling colon and pancreatic cancer. Though small in stature, Ginsburg has developed an outsized reputation as an outspoken justice and the leader of the court's liberal wing. Still, she often receives praise for her sharp legal mind from people on both sides of the aisle. Ginsburg is considered a trailblazer, the second woman to be seated on the Supreme Court. She's also been a strong advocate for women's rights and gender equality. Recently, she's become a cultural icon among progressives, featured in everything from clothing, books, and movies, and commonly referred to by her initials, RBG. A 2-time survivor of cancer, Ginsburg has said she has no near-term plans of slowing down or retiring.
Well, Ginsburg missed a ceremony for her newest colleague on the High Court due to her fall, Brett Kavanaugh's investiture at the Supreme Court. President Trump made the trek from the White House to attend along with First Lady Melania Trump. Kavanaugh repeated the judicial oath administered by Chief Justice John Roberts, marking the formal installing of the 102nd Justice of the Supreme Court. Others in attendance included the new Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker and former White House counsel Don McGahn.
Well, 24 hours after the bombshell resignation of the president's attorney general, a new boss is on the job at the Justice Department.
That's right. His name is Matt Whitaker. We are learning more about him and what the change means for how the Justice Department might be run.
We have a team of reporters covering the shakeup. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy and CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson are both with us. Ben, let's start with you. The first thing everyone wants to know is how will this affect the Russia investigation?
Well, John and Jen, it appears the Russia investigation could be wrapping up as I speak. A former DOJ official who worked with both Sessions and Whitaker told me that Matt is the right person for this role, adding that the biggest challenge for Whitaker will be Democrats who just don't want him over the Russia probe.
The president hasn't instructed him to do anything other than be the acting attorney general.
Have they talked about the investigation?
I won't talk about what the president talks about with any cabinet member. I've said that before, unless he does. But why would the president want to prolong the Mueller investigation? It makes no sense.
Former DOJ Deputy Director of Public Affairs Ian Pryor was not shocked with Sessions' departure since Trump hinted his job was in jeopardy after the midterms.
It wasn't a surprise in that this was something that was going to happen, but I think the quickness in which it did happen may have caught some people off guard.
It was no secret Trump was infuriated by Sessions recusing himself from the Russia probe.
Did Sessions ever talk to you about his frustrations with President Trump or some of the issues he was facing?
No, he never talked about frustrations with the president. I mean, any frustrations he may have had, he certainly kept to himself. I mean, he's somebody that believes in, being a loyal executor of the agenda, and that's what he did.
Critics are raising concerns about Sessions' successor, shining light on Whitaker's criticism of the Mueller investigation and even ways to end it.
I can see a scenario where Jeff Sessions is replaced with a recess appointment, and that Attorney General doesn't fire Bob Mueller, but he just reduces his budget so low that his investigation grinds to almost a halt.
Democrats now demand Whitaker recuse himself.
The biggest challenge for him is really going to be that the knives are out from Democrats. I mean, they are going to go after him, and you're seeing it already. As soon as that announcement was made, they started calling for his recusal. They want to investigate. No, I don't. I mean, I think there's no reason to recuse. What? Because he has an impression of what the Mueller investigation should look like that is different from what Senate and House Democrats believe. Look, it's a Department of Justice investigation. It's not a congressional investigation. He's the acting attorney general.
Now, the White House says the administration does not want to prolong the Russia investigation and will continue to cooperate with the DOJ. John, Jenna?
All right, thanks, Ben. And Ben, any word tonight on who the president might pick for a permanent attorney general?
Well, Jenna, that's a great question. We are hearing the White House is considering a handful of people, including former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Kansas Secretary Chris Kobach, Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, Senator Lindsey Graham, and yes, even Rudy Giuliani. We are told he is already interviewing potential replacements, so we'll have to wait and see.
Go back to him. Ben, presidents typically make some changes to the cabinet after the midterm elections. Any rumbling about who might be leaving next?
Yeah, John, we are hearing some rumblings from the West Wing here behind me that a couple jobs are on the line, including Secretary of Homeland Security Kirstjen Nielsen could be dismissed over her alleged weakness on border security. We are also hearing that Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke could be on his way out as well. Now, we've heard Trump say time and time again, everybody wants to work right here in the White House. So according to him, no matter who goes, it won't be hard to fill the position. John, Jenna?
All right, Ben Kennedy at the White House. Thank you, Ben. We want to head now to Capitol Hill, where Abigail Robertson is standing by. Abigail, let's start with the Sessions shakeup. But Democrats on the Hill, they're already raising some concerns.
Yes, top House Democrats have already said that they plan to investigate Sessions' resignation through House committees, but they cannot proceed with that until January when they officially have the majority in the House. Democratic senators like Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin have said that if the acting attorney general, Matt Whitaker, plans to end or greatly limit the Mueller investigation, it will be a constitutional crisis. And Democratic senators are also calling on Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to bring a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate Judiciary Committee and would protect Mueller to the Senate floor for a vote. But even if this bill were to pass the Senate and pass the House, it is very unlikely the president would sign it if it made it to his desk.
Now, Abigail, back to Jeff Sessions. There's some speculation about his future that he might return to his roots and explore a possible Senate run in his future. Are you hearing anything about that?
Yes, I'm hearing that there are a lot of people that think it is very likely that he will try and retake his Senate seat in Alabama. Democrat Doug Jones is currently serving out the remainder of Jeff Sessions' term after a special election last year. So this seat will be up again in 2020. And Sessions held that seat for 20 years before becoming the Attorney General. So there are many Alabama political analysts who think that it is very likely that he tries to run again and take it back.
All right, Abigail Robertson for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Abigail. Well, Kayleigh McEnany with the Republican National Committee joins us now. Kayleigh, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You know the president better than most. This was a surprise to some people, but not to others, the whole Sessions ousting. Was this waiting in the wings, Kayleigh, or were you as surprised as some others?
I was not surprised. All you have to do is look at the president's Twitter feed to find his discontent with Jeff Sessions. I think most of us saw this coming, saw this on the horizon. President Trump has the power as the chief law enforcement officer of the United States under Article 2 to do this. He was within his rights. And I think it wasn't a surprise. You could see it coming if you paid attention to his commentary.
Let's move to the Supreme Court. We, of course, reported on her falling and her injury. She's very active. She works out at least twice a week, probably healthier than most Americans, let alone any octogenarian out there. But what does her fall mean for the Supreme Court?
Well, we're praying for her, and as Kellyanne Conway said, I am as well. And, you know, this is someone who survived cancer twice, as you noted, and has overcome a lot of heart surgery. So, you know, I think she can handle a simple fall if she can get through those ailments. And, you know, she's in our prayers. She's a lion of the court, although I don't particularly agree with her jurisprudence. She's someone who's a staple there, someone who even Justice Scalia was friends with.
This fuels speculation, though, about a potential another nomination for President Trump to fill on the court. People talking about either her retiring or if she, you know, if her injury is extensive enough, she might not be able to get back to the court.
Well, should she decide to retire, President Trump will appoint someone from that list that we talked about. There are so many great contenders. Amy Coney Barrett was a pretty phenomenal pick that was close to becoming nominated last time around. I think it would be fantastic to see a third woman on the court and a woman take over a seat once held by a woman should RBG choose to retire. Sure. So we'll see. It's the president's pick, but there's a lot of great people waiting in the wings, and we've expanded our majorities in the Senate, so it will be much easier to get someone through than it was with Justice Kavanaugh.
Yeah, certainly. Well, Kayleigh, the president, he's really promised us civility, and, you know, after the pipe bomb attacks, he said he wanted to, you know, adopt a nicer tone, but we seem to be going back to some of that old rhetoric. We saw the situation yesterday with CNN's Jim Acosta. What did you make of that, and what did you make of that whole situation?
Well, I thought it was very unfortunate to see Jim Acosta essentially put his hand on a young girl, a staffer. He says he didn't. The video seems quite clear to me that Sarah Sanders put out. It's up to viewers to make up their own minds, but I thought that was an unfortunate interaction with the staffer. That being said, you know, the president said something yesterday that, you know, you don't know what it's like, I think he said to the media, to have your name demeaned, to have yourself defamed, to have your family attacked. I have to fight. I want to take a calmer tone, but that means the media standing up and also taking a calm and journalistically integrity type tone, one that the president can then return with civil discourse and not have to fight day in and day out. Yesterday, I would just point out that he was called a racist during the press conference 3 times. Allegations of, is this statement racist or that statement? You know, that was just in one press conference. The president's none of those things, and I think the media needs to stop with the name calling.
Well, Kelly, make yourself comfortable because Kayleigh is going to stick around with us. And when we come back, we're going to unpack the midterm election, specifically the evangelical effect, how Christians rock the vote. That's next. Well, voters turned out in historic numbers in Tuesday's midterm elections.
We took a deep dive into the numbers and saw no group was really more influential than Republicans than evangelical voters. Mark Martin has the story.
Well, God plays a big factor in my life.
The God factor was front and center. In a congressional race that saw presidential levels of voter turnout across the country, evangelical Christians showed up in droves. Faith and Freedom Coalition Chairman Ralph Reed attributes that surge to the president.
The evangelicals delivered this vote in a big way, and of course Donald Trump deserves an enormous amount of credit.
The faith-based vote surged to include more than 1 out of every 3 voters in Tuesday's elections. Evangelicals made up 26% of the national electorate, and of those, 80% voted for Republicans, with only 12% going for Democrats.
But the real evangelical impact was felt on a state level, where in states that flipped seats from Democrat to Republican, the evangelical electorate surpassed the national average every time.
There are a couple people looking down from heaven I want to recognize.
In Florida, where an emotional Rick Scott claimed victory in his bid for the Senate, 30% of all voters were evangelicals, and 80% of those Christians voted for Scott.
And we have a narrow window.
In Indiana, where Republican Mike Braun won his Senate bid, evangelical turnout topped the national average by 14%, and 71% cast their votes for Braun.
Without you, I'm nothing, and with you, I'm everything.
Similar evangelical numbers helped sweep in Senator-elect Kevin Cramer in North Dakota.
The good Lord and the people of Missouri have given us the victory.
And Republican Senate winner Josh Hawley, a Christian evangelical candidate CBN News has been following since the beginning of his Senate run in Missouri.
The country needs us, the culture needs us, our society needs us. We're the ones who have to step forward and to bring the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ into every corner of our society. It's our mission, it's our duty, it's also our great privilege. It's a tremendous, tremendous privilege.
He told us his faith drives his politics.
The Lord has called us to do our part in the public sphere, to stand for Him and to stand for the principles on which this country was founded. And as I see it, my job is to be faithful to those things and to leave the rest to the Lord.
Before the election, Christian leaders called on the faithful to be good citizens, not only by praying for our leaders, but also by voting for them at the polls. This election shows when they show up, it makes a difference. Mark Martin, CBN News.
Well, Kayleigh McEnany, spokesperson for the GOP, joins us once again. Kayleigh, can we talk a little bit about the GOP and how it worked for the evangelical vote? We know that they were a big factor in 2016. How did you keep evangelicals engaged?
Well, it's quite easy when you have a president who is so tuned into the interests of evangelical voters, who has been so faithful to his promises in appointing justices to the Supreme Court, too, who will safeguard religious liberty. He has a keen focus on those issues. So I think the achievements he's made have done quite a bit to keep and get evangelicals out there. They were, after all, indispensable to his election. A lot of people don't realize President Trump won more of the evangelical vote and the Catholic vote than his predecessor, Mitt Romney, did. They turned out. They're the reason he got elected, and President Trump works hard to keep their vote.
Yeah, more than President Bush as well, actually.
That's right.
Kayleigh, let's talk about women in the GOP. The GOP lost some support in the suburbs. Why do you think that was?
Well, you know, first what I would say is I think we as a party need to be more vocal about the things we are doing for women. Having female unemployment breaking historic records. That's a very big deal, and we need to be very vocal on these issues. And I think over the next 2 years, we have our task before us, which is to make our case to these suburban women, and we are going to do that. You know, Ivanka Trump is very passionate about paid family leave. That is something that we could realistically push through Congress. Democrats have control of the House. They've been talking about that, so now it's time to make that a reality. And should that pass under the leadership of President Trump, I think suburban women are going to come home to our party.
Kayleigh, we only have about a little over a minute left. Talking about divided Congress and divided Washington, on working with the Democrats, specifically House, the president said that he wanted unity, but then he later tweeted that two can play that game, talking about investigation. So what are we expecting to see over the next 2 years, realistically?
Well, President Trump has extended an olive branch. He wants to work with the left, and I would note that he extended an olive branch even when he had both majorities on immigration. He said, let's find a path to legalization for DACA recipients if you give me the wall on infrastructure. So now it's up to Democrats to take a step toward him. But should they investigate and subpoena, he's going to fight back. He has every right to do so, but he's extended the olive branch. It's up to Nancy Pelosi to extend one back.
Kayleigh McEnany with the Republican National Committee. So great to have you. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Well, up next, everyone can use a getaway, right? Especially presidents. Stay with us for an inside look at Camp David. It's the hidden getaway where presidents have found rest and refreshment for decades. Camp David serves our commander-in-chief as both a weekend retreat and important business center.
CBN News found out for President Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy, the hidden cabin in Maryland mountains was also much more. Once again, here's Amber Strong.
The elusive and somewhat mysterious Camp David has played double duty for more than a dozen U.S. presidents. From hosting foreign dignitaries in a relaxed setting to serving as nerve center for major policy decisions. And for former Reagan Press Secretary Mark Weinberg, a home away from home.
On Friday afternoons, we would get on the helicopter on the south lawn of the White House,
president would wave to everybody and then disappear, essentially for 48 hours.
In his book, Movie Nights with the Reagans, Weinberg fondly recalls those weekend getaways at Camp David.
Abandon ship! Open all deck hatches!
An actor himself, those movie nights at Aspen Lodge allowed the president to relive his years on the silver screen. The Reagans viewed hundreds of films during their time at Camp David, from Guess Who's Coming to Dinner to Crocodile Dundee.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
Sometimes the art imitated life, like the aftermath of Rocky IV.
And this was at the time that, the Cold War was really heating up, if to use a phrase. So it did have an influence. And at one point, the Russians, the Soviets, told the Americans, complained to American diplomats about Rocky IV. They said, "Why? You shouldn't show that. That's not a good movie to show." The president told us this. The American diplomat said to the Soviets, "Well, we don't have anything to do with that. In our country, the government doesn't control the movies." And they couldn't understand that.
Sometimes the movies influenced platforms. Case in point, the 1980 film 9 to 5.
Because there was a scene with Dolly Parton and Jane Fonda and I believe Lily Tomlin smoking marijuana. And you have to remember, this was the 80s. It was illegal back then. And this movie glamorized it, and he thought that was a terrible message to send to young people. And Mrs. Reagan was so bothered by it that she called them out on it in a speech.
That iconic scene pushed the First Lady further into her anti-drug agenda, and those famous 3 words.
Just say no.
Weinberg says despite the media's narrative of a cold First Lady, those moments gave him a glimpse into the relationship between Nancy and her Ronnie.
She was very warm and welcoming. She took an interest in people. She listened when you were in the room. She was protective of her husband, as well she should have been.
While the Reagans loved their privacy, that didn't stop the press from going to great lengths to catch a glimpse of the president.
They took the lens that they used for the space shuttle, the biggest lens that CBS owned. They brought them out there so they could get the president riding on this horse, this wavy figure in the heat. And he knew it. And he said, "I'm going to have some fun with them." And he did this and pretended to fall off the horse.
Weinberg fondly recalls Reagan's famous sense of humor, even with the media.
For our friends in the press who place a high premium on accuracy, let me say, I did not actually hear George Washington say that.
While Mrs. Reagan usually decided which film to review, Mr. Reagan found a particular love of An Extraterrestrial and his best friend, Elliot.
E.T. was a movie that touched both of their hearts. They had tears in their eyes at the end. It was a very wonderful story, a fantastic story in the literal sense of the word. And those kinds of themes of letting your imagination go wherever it could and believing in the impossible and wondering what was out there and wondering what the future could be, those were very Reagan-esque themes.
Even after the credits rolled on the Reagans' time in the White House, those weekend getaways forged a friendship that would last until the end.
And I told him that I was considering leaving the staff after having been there 10 years, that it was time for me to move on. And he said, "Well, I understand. You're a young man. I expect you to do that. And by the way, Mark, I'm not going to be here forever." Well, I knew what he meant, but I didn't want to acknowledge that.
Still, Weinberg says Reagan was at peace with this life and the next.
He said, "Mark, it's okay. I'm not afraid of that. And in fact, I look forward to it." Because he knew that God had a plan for him and that he lived a life on earth and would be reunited with people after. And he was very grounded because of his faith.
Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
That was a great story.
I love that.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.